In a dusty office in Chengdu, a data analyst arrives at work. The door is locked. A note taped to the frame reads, "Operations paused. Reassignment pending." 2 floors up, the unemployment department is dark. No computers running. No reports printing. On that same day, without warning, Beijing stopped publishing jobless rates. No youth unemployment figures. No housing price updates. Not even soy sauce production. The numbers went silent, and no one on television mentioned it. Instead, the news praised strong recovery. Factories thriving. Exports resilient. But outside the screen, the truth was louder. PMI had dropped to 49.0. Factories in Suzhou shut down. Evergrande was liquidated overseas. And over 40 million social media posts vanished. They didn't explain. They didn't argue. They just deleted. When a nation stops counting its problems, it's not because they've been solved. It's because the answers are more dangerous than the questions. So here's the real story. What does a superpower do when it realizes the truth can bring it down? It turns off the lights and hopes no one asks what's missing in the dark. It began with price tags. T-shirts that once cost $6 shot up to $11. A kitchen blender, now 40% more. And behind each spike was the same reason, tariffs. In 2025, Washington didn't just raise duties. It sealed the exits. The de minimis loophole gone. Temu, Shine, and thousands of small Chinese sellers lost their duty-free window. It wasn't a cut. It was a choke. In China's factories, the ripple was instant. Orders dried up. Assembly lines slowed. By April, the official PMI had dropped to 49.0, below the line. Below survival. In Dongguan, workers were let go in waves. In Kunshan, night shifts were canceled. In Yiwu, warehouse lights went dim at 7 p.m. permanently. The signs were everywhere. But something else happened too. Something quieter. The data disappeared. Youth unemployment, last seen above 21%, was never updated again. No explanation. Just a blank space where numbers used to be. Real estate indicators followed. Housing sales, land auctions, mortgage default rates silenced. Construction sites stood frozen. Half-finished towers left exposed to wind and dust. But the metrics that could explain it vanished. From Beijing's perspective, this wasn't mismanagement. It was containment. Because in China, numbers aren't just statistics. They're political lifelines. Each percentage point of growth means legitimacy. Each uptick in unemployment means risk. So when the data turned red, they turned off the screen. There was no speech, no press release, no public apology. Only silence. And silence has its own meaning. Here's what was really happening beneath the slogans. Tariffs hit hard. Factories cut output. Workers were laid off. Younger people couldn't find jobs. Families stopped spending. Property values dropped. Developers went bankrupt. Land sales froze. Local governments lost revenue. And without funding, the system stopped moving. In the US, that would lead to congressional hearings. In China, it led to redacted reports. When a machine built on confidence begins to rattle, you don't fix the gears, you hide the sound. That's what this was. Not reform. Not adjustment. A blackout. And the blackout had layers. Over 40 million social media posts were wiped. Images of protests. Clips of shutdowns. Charts showing steep drops in industrial output. Gone. What stayed were slogans. Words like resilience. Phrases like domestic circulation. Numbers like 5% GDP growth. Even though outside analysts project only 3.5%. The illusion of stability had to be louder than the truth of contraction. In any other nation, missing data would spark alarm. In China, it's the alarm itself that gets disconnected. The world had long admired the machinery of Chinese planning. The speed, the scale, the certainty. But 2025 revealed the fragile truth. The machine only works when no one sees the cracks. And now? There's no doubt the cracks are there. Because Beijing just covered them in blackout cloth. This wasn't just an economic response. It was a psychological retreat. Not from the numbers. From what the numbers might force them to admit. For years, China sold the world a vision. A state that never misses a step. An economy that never truly breaks. And for a while, the world believed it. Even when the numbers looked too perfect. Even when the risks were too quiet. But in 2025, the facade cracked. Because Beijing didn't just manipulate the story. It erased the language used to tell it. Take youth unemployment. In 2023, it crossed 21%. That was the last time the figure was ever published. 1 in 5 young people jobless? Some said it was closer to 1 in 3. But we'll never know. Because they stopped counting. Then came real estate. The collapse wasn't a whisper. It was a scream. Evergrande was liquidated overseas. Country Garden plunged into restructuring. Entire cities stood half-built, half-abandoned. And then, no new housing data. No mortgage default reports. No auction disclosures. Just glowing articles about urban renewal. In manufacturing, it was the same. The PMI hit 49.0 in April. A clear contraction. Factories cut back. Exports fell. But instead of talking about recovery plans, they talked about external headwinds. Instead of fixing the engine, they threw away the dashboard. It wasn't just spin. It was shut down. But why? Because in China, data isn't just information. It's power. And when the data turns ugly, it threatens the legitimacy of the party itself. The entire system is built on predictability, on the promise of stability, on the idea that the government sees everything and handles everything. But if the numbers say otherwise, the foundation shakes. So they cut the wire. Even soy sauce production numbers were pulled. It sounds absurd until you realize the symbolism. If they're afraid to show soy sauce stats, they're afraid of everything. And the censorship didn't stop at data. Over 40 million online posts were deleted. News clips, charts, eyewitness videos from laid-off workers. Gone. Even financial analysts inside China were warned. Some stopped publishing altogether. Others switched to vague language, sectoral adjustments, temporary distortions, expected rebalancing. It wasn't economics. It was code, spoken under pressure. And the outside world noticed. But not fast enough. Because this wasn't just a blackout. It was a confession. You don't turn off the lights unless you're afraid of what people might see. And once the lights are off, it's not just the outside that can't see in. The people inside, can't see where they're going. To the outside world, it looked like pressure. Just another trade war headline. More tariffs. More noise. A classic bargaining chip from Washington. But inside Beijing, something else happened. Something deeper. Something strategic. Because the tariffs weren't just designed to punish. They were designed to provoke. When the Trump administration ramped up trade barriers in early 2025, it wasn't expecting a deal. It was expecting a mirror. A mirror that would force China to look at itself. And blink. The goal wasn't a signature on paper. The goal was reaction. And that's exactly what happened. China didn't respond with reforms. It didn't announce support packages or stimulus plans. It didn't reassure markets. It did something no strong power should ever do. It turned off the data. Instead of opening the books, it shut them. Instead of correcting the engine, it cut the sensors. To Washington, that wasn't a counter. That was confirmation. The illusion of control was gone. The US didn't have to collapse China's economy. It just had to make China collapse its own credibility. That's the real twist. Because when you stop reporting your unemployment rate, you're not hiding a number. You're surrendering the scoreboard. And investors? They noticed. Fast. Foreign direct investments slowed. Portfolio funds pulled back. American and European firms began rerouting production. Apple shifted more iPhone assembly to India. Intel delayed fab expansion in China. The strategy was working. Not through confrontation, but through corrosion. Beijing had always played a long game. But this time, the US did too. By cutting off China's backdoor into US markets. By slamming the de minimis loophole shut. The US wasn't just closing a trade route. It was removing the mask. No more cheap shipments slipping under the radar. No more untaxed bulk moving through ports. Every package now visible. Every export now counted. And as the numbers got real, China stopped counting. Here's what changed. Before, the world saw China as structured, disciplined, engineered. Now they saw fragility, a nation that chose silence over strength. The slogans, dual circulation, national self-reliance, fortress economy, they weren't signs of confidence. They were signs of retreat. Even inside China, officials began to worry. Some quietly pushed for trade talks. Others hinted at lifting retaliatory tariffs on pharmaceuticals, chips, aircraft components. Not to retaliate, to survive. But the world wasn't listening anymore. It was watching a regime that could build skyscrapers in days, but couldn't publish its unemployment rate. Watching a system that claimed global leadership, but couldn't face its own numbers. This wasn't a trade war. It was a stress test. And China, under pressure, chose opacity. That's not power. That's fear. And fear, once seen, can't be unseen. It starts with a whisper, a notice pinned to a factory gate, production suspended, then the power gets cut. Then the workers stop coming back. In Dongguan, an assembly line falls silent. In Suzhou, the night shift vanishes without warning. In Yiwu, packages stop moving. The workers know something's wrong, but the news says everything's fine. A man gets laid off. He tells no one. He scrolls through job boards at midnight. No replies, no options. His daughter, just graduated, has nowhere to send her resume. She joins millions, over 21% of Chinese youth now jobless. At least that was the last number we were allowed to see. At home, the budget shrinks. The fridge gets emptier. The apartment gets colder. They stop going out. They cancel the wedding. They delay having kids. China's birth rate hits record lows. Not because people don't want families, but because no one can afford them. The pain spreads to the cities. Empty restaurants, vacant storefronts, billboards fading under layers of dust. Then housing collapses. Apartments once worth $500,000 sit unfinished. Buyers protest. Developers flee. Country garden defaults. Evergrande is liquidated. Construction sites rust under open skies. The skyline freezes. And with it, hope. Local governments panic. Their budgets depended on land sales. Now there are no buyers, no revenue, no plan B. Public services begin to falter. Teachers go unpaid. Clinics close early. Train stations cut hours. But there's no press conference. No emergency broadcast. Just nothing. A vacuum where truth used to be. Citizens start filming, posting, describing what's happening. And then deletion. Over 40 million posts disappear. Search results go blank. Counts are locked. In the streets, silence grows. People stop speaking honestly, even to each other. The economic engine isn't just slowing. The stalling in plain sight. But no one's allowed to say it. Because in today's China, acknowledging collapse is more dangerous than collapse itself. And that's how the dominoes fall. Not with fire, but with fog. Not with riots, but with routine. Country still moving, but nowhere anyone wants to go. The layoffs didn't stop at the factory gates. They seeped into the streets, into homes, into minds. What starts as job loss turns into something deeper, a psychological shutdown. The belief that things will improve fades. Young people give up searching. Older workers take early retirements they can't afford. Families cut back on everything: food, fuel, futures. One father pulls his daughter from college. Too expensive, too uncertain. She goes home, stays in her room, scrolls through filtered news, watches her future shrink pixel by pixel. In the cities, weddings are postponed. Births decline. China's population contracts again. The middle class, once the engine of spending, now guards every yuan. No new car. No renovations. Just waiting. Watching. Local governments tighten. Pensions delayed. Subway repairs paused. Teachers told to be patient. The budget will come. Someday. But it doesn't. Meanwhile, protests rise. Small at first. Teachers. Retirees. Construction crews. Then bigger. Out-of-work youth gather in parks. Families rally outside shuttered banks. By mid-2025, public unrest jumps 41%. But it never trends, because the internet forgets. On command, videos vanish. Posts disappear. Entire forums go blank overnight. Even private chat groups get flagged. Monitored. Muted. People stop asking questions. They stop using names. They stop looking each other in the eye. And that silence becomes survival. Inside ministries, panic grows. Officials write reports no one reads. They model outcomes on incomplete data. Guesswork replaces governance. Foreign investors notice. They don't issue warnings. They leave. FDI drops. Capital flees. Factories stall. Deals die. Global firms, once patient, pivot to Vietnam, India, Mexico. Apple moves faster. Intel delays indefinitely. Because trust is not something you announce. It's something you show. And China isn't showing anything anymore. The global cost rises. Supply chains wobble. Investors adjust risk models. Countries reconsider exposure. And slowly, a new understanding takes hold. This isn't a slowdown. This is controlled erosion. A nation still marching, but inward, still growing, on paper, still leading, with no followers, because leadership requires visibility. And China turned off the lights. Now the rest of the world walks carefully, around a superpower it can no longer read. No numbers, no signals, no trust, just a vast machine, still humming. But no one knows how long the engine will last. A nation's strength isn't in its slogans. It's in its ability to face hard truths, even when they hurt. But in 2025, China made a different choice. Turned away from the mirror and chose darkness over disclosure. No more unemployment data. No housing crash figures. No honest metrics at all. The people still move. The trains still run. But no one knows where it's really going. Not the worker in Chengdu. Not the investor in New York. Not even the officials behind the curtains in Beijing. Because when the system hides from its own reality, it loses the ability to lead. Not just globally, internally. It's no longer a matter of recovery or strategy. It's a matter of trust. And trust, once broken, doesn't return with a press release. So ask yourself, if the data is gone and the silence grows, how long until the rest of the world stops listening altogether? Or worse, how long until the people inside stop believing anything at all?